more breaking news this hour. Another Israeli airstrike hitting southern Beirut just a short time ago. This is the first video that we're actually getting of the new explosion. It follows another barrage of daytime strikes in those southern suburbs. Now, that was after a round of strikes. Israel's military said it was targeting Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters and communications unit. The U.S. has repeatedly called for de-escalation, but so far, as you can see, that has fallen on deaf ears. Kevin Liptak is live for us at the White House. Natasha Bertrand joins us from the Pentagon. Kevin, I want to go to you first. You know, the president was off to see some of the damage from Hurricane Helene. Recently, he was on the lawn and indicated that they were, quote, talking about it in terms of a strike in Iran, and that had to do with hitting its oil facilities. As we are looking at this unfold, what more is the White House saying? Because they continue to call for de-escalation, but it's in weeks now that all we've seen is things get worse.
Yeah, and I think what the White House is looking for now is a measured response from Israel towards Iran as a reprisal for what happened in Israel over the last week or so. But I think, you know, there's an open question of how much leverage President Biden has when he's talking to the Israelis about how they want to respond. We did hear from him yesterday when he was asked about an Israeli strike on nuclear sites inside Iran. He said he could not support that. He would advise against it. But when he was asked today about those oil facilities, he did leave the door open, although he didn't come out explicitly and say that he would endorse that kind of strike. And as you would imagine, that kind of strike would only cause oil prices to spike. That is the last thing President Biden wants 5 weeks before an election. So this is all very complicated for him. And I think when you talk to American officials, they are in consultations with the Israelis, talking about how they see this all playing out. But certainly President Biden hasn't yet gotten on the phone with his counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu. They actually haven't spoken since August. And I think it is an open question about how much leverage President Biden actually has in all of this, or whether he's left sort of on the sidelines to watch this all play out. At the end of the day, his great fear is that this will all trigger a wider war, a regional war, a further escalation that could potentially draw the U.S. Closer into direct contact with Iran, which is really sort of the last thing he wants. And so certainly President Biden watching this all very closely. The other thing that he said today was that there would be new sanctions on Iran. And that's something that he and the other leaders of the G7 had been talking about yesterday in that virtual phone call. It remains to be seen what exactly those sanctions will look like and how much effect they will have. The U.S., of course, has already mounted a lot of sanctions on Iran already. So it remains to be seen what areas they think they can still target and have a great amount of effect. But President Biden, watching this very closely, he also said today that he didn't expect this counterstrike to occur today during the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, but certainly they do believe that this could occur in the coming days. Paula.
Yeah, a startling fact there that you give us, that Netanyahu and President Biden have not spoken since August. That is extraordinary, although, of course, the two governments are keeping in close contact. Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon, I want to go to you now. I do want to highlight the fact that the IDF is now reporting that about 100 launches have come from Lebanon into northern Israel in just the last few hours. I do note they say that most of them are along the Metula area, in that border area. I've been to that area. We are not talking about anything that's crossing deep into Israel. Having said that, Natasha, what more are you hearing, given the fact that the United States has obviously bolstered any of its defenses and any of the military hardware and advice that it can give to Israel, and really repositioned a lot of assets there in the last few weeks in anticipation of this?
Yeah, and that's exactly why the U.S. military has bolstered its force posture in the region, is because of the risk of a further dramatic escalation in this fighting. Now, we reported yesterday that the U.S. intelligence community does believe that around 50% of Hezbollah's projectiles have been taken out in these Israeli airstrikes, leaving them with half of the supply that they once had of things like rockets and missiles and drones. And so that has severely weakened their capabilities here. But as we can see, they have continued striking back. And we saw that, 8 IDF soldiers were killed just yesterday in the fighting in Lebanon. And so what the U.S. military is preparing for here is really a conflict that escalates even further than just Israel and Lebanon and actually expands into that war with Iran. And that is what everyone is waiting to see at this point. If the escalating tit for tat between Israel and Iran actually continues and draws everyone into this large regional war. The U.S. has warships pretty much all over at this point in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea near Iran, to prepare for the possibility that they have to again be intercepting these missiles. And of course, one of the biggest jobs of the U.S. military, if it comes to it, is to help evacuate U.S. citizens. And that is why there are thousands of U.S. Marines currently in the Eastern Mediterranean preparing for that exact contingency if it becomes necessary for the U.S. to conduct this kind of mass evacuation operation. But for now, there are simply thousands of U.S. troops that are currently in the region, essentially on a heightened standby alert to come to the aid of Israel if need be, by helping them with additional air defenses, and of course to help defend the many other U.S. troops who are in other parts of the region, including Jordan, Iraq, Syria, who could be vulnerable to attack by Iran's additional proxy groups.
Yeah, a lot to think about. And as we point out, the Pentagon getting ready for all eventualities. Kevin, back to you at the White House. There has been a lot of criticism of the Biden policy here and whether or not they could have done more, should have done more. There is a debate whether they could have done anything to influence Israel on any level. You know, I am watching the price of oil. It's up nearly 5% today. How front of mind is the election right now, and the fact that Americans may be very unsettled looking at their screens right now and wondering what impact it will have on their lives and on their military?
Yeah, I think we can safely say that there's nothing that Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, wants less than a full regional war in the Middle East breaking out in the weeks before the election, because, of course, it will amount to a referendum on the Biden-Harris administration, that they were unable to contain this conflict to Gaza, that they weren't able to use whatever leverage that they had on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the war in Gaza and to lower the temperatures across the region. And certainly when you talk to White House officials, they do say that they have tried to, put the finger on Netanyahu to try and get him to ease up in Gaza, to try and come to a ceasefire agreement both in Gaza and on the Israel-Lebanon border. But certainly Netanyahu himself also is aware that an election is coming in the United States. And there is a sense among White House officials, at their most frustrated moments, who wonder whether Netanyahu, who knows that he has a very staunch ally in Donald Trump, could be trying to sort of, make conditions ripe for a Republican victory in November. Now, I think the Israelis would vehemently deny that, but it is a question that you hear administration officials asking. The other sort of aspect to this is that the election makes it very difficult, I think, for Democrats to come out and forcefully criticize Netanyahu and forcefully criticize Israel, particularly at a moment when it is under attack from Iran. And they wonder whether Netanyahu could see this opening to really do something quite forceful in Iran, knowing that he wouldn't necessarily get much pushback from the current administration because of its political sort of bind that it's in. So this is all a very complicated dynamic, but I think, for Harris and for Biden, they are aware that this is a situation that looks like it could tip out of control very easily. They very much want it to not do that, to contain it, to try and end the fighting and end the violence. But at this point, it's not very clear how they will go about doing that.
Okay, and again, as you said, just a little over a month to an election in the United States. Kevin Liptak for us from the White House, and Tasha Bertrand at the Pentagon. Appreciate it.